Hi, my name's Alex Bagnall. I'm a costs lawyer and I'm the technical manager at Total Legal Solutions. In this video, I'm going to be answering a question which we're asked very often by our clients, namely, what's better, a schedule of costs or a bill of costs? The first thing we need to do in this video is define what we mean by bills of costs and schedules of costs. Bills of costs tend to be very detailed documents. They contain a narrative at the start which has a qualitative overview of the work which was done. The body of the bill breaks down correspondence items and attendances on each party. There tends to be a schedule of documents items which explains the date on which preparatory work was done, who did the work, what rate was charged, and how long was spent. Bills of costs tend to be prepared by cost professionals, cost lawyers or cost draftsmen like ourselves. Schedules of costs, on the other hand, tend to be more of a top-down overview. They contain a lot less information. They tend to be prepared by fee earners employed by solicitors, often the fee earner who had conduct of the case. It's often the case that a solicitor will prepare a schedule of costs before preparing a bill. Why? Well, there's a number of perceived benefits of schedules of costs. The first is that they're perceived to be cheaper than preparing a bill. The second is that it's perceived that they're quicker to draft and result in quicker settlements than preparing formal bills. And finally, the view is often, well, what could possibly go wrong by drafting a schedule? We'll put our claim for costs in. If it's not accepted, then we can go to drafting a bill at a later stage. So are schedules of costs actually cheaper? Instinctively, the answer would be yes, of course they are, because it would mean that the solicitors who are preparing the schedules of costs don't have to pay a cost draftsman to prepare a bill. However, when one looks at this in a little more detail, the answer isn't quite as clear. A competent cost draftsman who considers a solicitor's file of papers in detail will inevitably locate time which is evidenced by the file, but which isn't necessarily contemporaneously recorded. In cases which are the subject of a cost management order, a competent cost draftsman can very significantly increase the level of recovery. They do this by identifying which phases have an underspend and which phases have an overspend, and then looking at work which could potentially fall within either of those phases and ensuring that it is claimed in the phase where there has been an underspend. That way, the level of costs recovered tend to be substantially higher. And what about interest? A bill of costs has to be served within 3 months of the authority for assessment. If it isn't, then it's possible that all interest which would otherwise accrue might be disallowed. If time is spent negotiating on the basis of a schedule of costs and this does not lead to settlement, that can often push the case beyond the 3-month deadline and therefore lead to interest which accrues at a rate of 8% being disallowed. And then there's the business cost. To put it simply, if your fee earners are spending time preparing schedules of costs, then that time isn't being spent working on their files. They're not progressing matters, they're not achieving settlements. And finally, at Total Legal Solutions, we operate on a zero net cost service. What this means is that whatever fees we charge to you are capped at the amount that is recovered from the paying party for the work that we've done. So whilst there is notionally a charge for the service which we provide in drafting bills, in effect it doesn't actually cost our instructing solicitors anything because it's paid for in full by the paying party. But the most important reason why the preparation of a schedule of costs is not actually cheaper than preparing a bill is because the level of costs which is recovered on the basis of schedules is generally so much lower than where a formal bill is being prepared. This graph is based on the data which we collect from cases in which we act for both paying and receiving parties, and it's clear that the level of costs recovered on the basis of schedules is substantially lower across all different case types than where bills of costs have been prepared. The difference is most pronounced in personal injury work. In RTA, EL and PL cases, recovery is about 18% less on schedules than bills, and in clinical negligence work it's over 20% lower. So are lower recoveries compensated for through a quicker settlement? Not in our experience. We tend to find that schedules of costs receive a rather hostile reception from paying parties. We know from the paying party work that we do that our clients often ask what the problem is when a receiving party serves a schedule of costs. There can be an assumption or a presumption that there is an issue with the funding arrangement or some other reason why the solicitor doesn't want to sign a formal bill of costs. A desire for a quick cost settlement is often motivated by cash flow concerns. It may be that the solicitors have been acting on a CFA basis, in which case they've been funding the litigation throughout. They've done years of work potentially without being paid for it. Or it could be that the receiving party's been paying costs as they've gone and they want to recover that money as quickly as possible. These are legitimate concerns, but they can be addressed through an application for a payment on account of costs. Our experience shows that where applications for payments on account are supported by formal bills rather than schedules of costs, the amount which is recovered as a payment on account tends to be substantially higher. And finally, one shouldn't lose sight of the fact that a well-drafted bill of costs can actually lead to a quicker settlement than a poorly drafted schedule. Where the bill makes it clear what work was done and justifies the time which was spent on that work and the rates which were charged, there's going to be much less scope for negotiation and nitpicking by the paying party. And finally, what could go wrong by preparing a schedule of costs yourself instead of instructing a cost draftsman to prepare a detailed bill? Well, there's a concept in computer science, garbage in, garbage out, and this is the idea that the output of a process can only ever be as good as the input. So where a schedule of costs is being prepared based on a time recording ledger or a case management system, that schedule is only going to be accurate if the fee earner who recorded their time did so accurately. So all of the work needs to be recorded, the time spent on that work needs to be accurately recorded, and in the case of matters which were subject to a cost management order, the correct phase needs to be ascribed to that work. The reality is that preparing a claim for costs is specialist work. The Court of Appeal has made it very clear that if a claim for costs is advanced which is not accurate, that will represent a most serious disciplinary offence. So it's essential when a solicitor puts their name to a claim for costs that they are certain that it is an accurate representation of the costs which have been incurred. An experienced cost draftsman will ensure that the bill which is prepared is precisely that, whereas preparing a claim for costs on the basis of a time recording ledger which may not be accurate can open up the door to all kinds of trouble. This was seen in the case of Stables and the City of York. In that matter, a schedule of costs was advanced, it wasn't possible to negotiate a settlement, and so a bill of costs was subsequently drafted. That bill was significantly higher than what was in the schedule because the cost draftsman identified work which hadn't been properly time recorded when it was done. The court concluded that the schedule of costs should be treated as a cap on the maximum recoverability of costs. But more than that, the court treated the difference between the bill and the schedule as being indicative that something may be wrong, and because of that, the court directed the claimant's solicitors to disclose all of their contemporaneous time recording documents. Stables is not a unique case. There's plenty of examples in the authorities where claims for costs were advanced which were not accurate and which ultimately led to severe sanctions being imposed on the solicitors. Everything from disciplinary sanctions through to a wholesale abatement or even the complete disallowance of costs which were properly incurred. Instructing a competent and experienced cost draftsman will ensure that these issues are completely avoided. So in summary, whilst it might be superficially a good idea to prepare a schedule instead of a bill, the reality is that schedules don't result in recovery of anywhere near the level of costs that a bill of costs does. They're not cheaper overall. They don't result in a quicker settlement, and there's plenty of scope for things to go wrong. And that's why our advice to our clients is always to prepare a formal bill of costs instead of a schedule wherever possible.